This video was brought to you in part by the supporters of the AMTV Patreon. Thank you. Hello, and welcome to the Ident Review, the show where we have a good look and chat about the various television idents that we've come to know and love over the years. And for this instalment, we're going to be looking at a selection of fan favourite sequences from Channel 4. Ever since its debut in 1982, Channel 4 attempted to spearhead its way into the collective hearts and minds of the UK viewing public. It promised to offer an alternative to the established programmes from the BBC and ITV, and in many ways, it did succeed in that remit. One area of this success was with its idents. Right from the beginning, the use of computer-generated effects helped make the Channel 4 logo one that is instantly recognisable to your everyday TV viewer, and it's one that has remained largely unchanged over the last 40 years. However, as the times go by, so did their idents, with rebrands and redesigns coming every so often. By the early 2000s, Channel 4's presentation was undergoing a major makeover once again, giving birth to an era of sequences that would last for over a decade and become some of the nation's favourites. So let's kick things off with our first ident from this set, Bowls. We all remember this one, don't we? This was one of the most common idents that I would see whenever I turned on to Channel 4 at this time. It's endlessly charming to see the pieces of the four move around these bowl players as they look on bemused at what the hell is going on. Stylized as a hedge, it's a great look for the iconic symbol, and the music used represents the growing presence of the pieces whilst also remaining quite relaxing throughout, helping to contribute to a sequence that is peaceful and quite serene to view. I love the close-up shots we see as well. It's a small touch, but it really helps give an extra layer and depth to what we're seeing on the screen. If I could offer any criticism, it would be that I wish we could have seen more reactions from the players rather than mainly at the end, and a clearer shot of the hedge for rather than just a hovering shadow. But nitpicks aside, the Bowls ident is seen as a classic for a reason, and hopefully our next sequence will continue that high quality as we look at Diner. Now, doesn't this just feel straight out of a movie? Everything about this reminds me of a classic American film, where the characters are on the open road, perhaps on the run, and stop over at a seedy motel and gas station illuminated in glorious neon lights. To discuss the lights, the colour palette of the sequence has been selected to absolute perfection. The purples mixing with the different colours of the signs blend wonderfully, and the whole setting just adds to the atmosphere and impact that it has. If you're familiar with the ident set, you'll know that eventually we'll see the 4 logo once all the pieces line up, and when we do see it, it looks fantastic. It would have been really cool to perhaps see some people interacting with each other within the scene, just to add that extra layer, but really, this ident is great as it is, and again, is beloved by many Channel 4 fans. We're 2 for 2 so far, so let's see if our winning streak continues now as we have a gander at Dubai.
Well, no lectures on morals for Jackie. Hollyoaks is at 6:30, right after Springfield's finest at work, The Simpsons, on 4.
A really interesting one this is. We see the camera pan across the Dubai skyline, witnessing the numerous construction projects that are going on. Dubai is a man-made city, built largely around desert land, and this was around 15 years ago. I mean, if you see the place now, it's very impressive in terms of its buildings. So, in retrospect, this is a great look back at what was to come. I also really love the music, taking some more regular beats we hear in this era, mixed with a variety of sounds that come from that part of the world, and the two blend quite nicely. I would have loved a few splashes of colour, but given the setting of the ident, I can forgive it somewhat for that. Seeing the logo form against the buildings is also really cool, though for some with poor sight like me, it's a little hard to clock at first. I'd be hesitant to call it an outright winner, like the first two, but I'll give it a pass, as there are several strong factors to it. But now we move to what could be considered as the most iconic ident from this set. Flats.
Now on 4 back to come dine, and Ray is doing their heads in.
I'm sure you've all seen this one before. Now, way back when, we actually covered flats on a really early episode of the ident review, so if you want to hear my thoughts from back in 2018, feel free to check it out. Back here in the present, I think flats is without doubt one of the best idents of this set for a number of reasons. I love how it's unafraid to show how bleak a setting a block of flats can be, and not saying that they're all like this, but many flats are left underdeveloped, underfunded, and in many cases, left to rot. A lot of the tenants are left without support, and I just think the sequence attempts to show what that sort of setting can be like. An abandoned shopping trolley, the dingy setting and bland colour palette, at least that's the impact it had on me as a viewer. The 4 logo is clearly visible this time, and again, has been cleverly constructed to include elements of this kind of area, including many now dated satellite dishes. It may make some viewers feel uneasy, especially with the music, but for me, I think it serves as a great example of Channel 4's remit to be different and to use its platforms to show sequences that other channels may be too afraid to tread into. Moving onwards, our next ident today features quite a lot of hay. Talk about an oxymoron. The first thing I always notice in this one is the music. It sounds so light and fluffy, especially when compared to what we just heard in flats. As pleasing as the music is, and the initial sight of several bales of hay on a clear day, we quickly see that some of them are burning. And sure, this does happen on occasion, but it seems like an interesting choice to include in what is an otherwise very peaceful and calming ident. Some may find the levitating bales a bit weird and slightly off-putting, but I kinda like it. Obviously, the levitation is to ensure that the 4 logo can be properly formed and lined up, and to me at least, it's far less odd than the burning bales, that's for sure. I would have liked to see a version that didn't include the fiery bales, but even with them there, I still think this is a straightforward yet memorable ident in the Channel 4 army. But now we go from the fields to the street, as we take a trip down the market. This one has a sense of optimism to it, I feel. Street markets are always vibrant, wonderful places, where you could find a wealth of items to pick up and usually in a very friendly environment. This one seems no different, and the 4 logo is apparent right away this time around. The use of market stall boxes to create the symbol looks fantastic, and the brief few seconds that we see it all together are stunning. The music further contributes to this positive feeling, as it sounds bright, full of life, and really captures the excitement that you can get whilst visiting a market such as this. It may be quite short in comparison to some of the other idents we've looked at so far, but for me, market represents the little boost of positive vibes you get from a well-designed and well-executed sequence. We now move from the market to a location right at the very heart of London itself, Trafalgar Square.
Michael Palin and Maggie Smith making pigs of themselves in a private function at 10 to midnight, right after we find out what the Pythons did next on 4. Wait for it.
Those poor pigeons, eh? Right from the get-go, we are treated to the ever-iconic image of Nelson's Column, the key landmark within Trafalgar Square, before quickly cutting to some pigeons, everyone's favourite everyday nuisance. Now, I haven't got a problem with pigeons per se. Just like any bird, they come and go as they please and do pretty much whatever they want. And this ident acknowledges the public's occasional frustrations with the winged creatures. For when several land on the 4 structure we see close to the column, it begins to hydraulically shift itself inwards, which frightens all the pigeons and causing them to scatter. I find this sequence quite amusing, because I'm sure many of us have all had moments where we've been surrounded by pigeons, usually when they want your food, and we just want them to bugger off. This ident manages to communicate that effort in a humorous way, without needing to demonstrate anything cruel towards the birds. The 4 structure itself is pretty cool, but it feels a little out of place in Trafalgar Square if you ask me. Now, this is London, I mean really bizarre structures pop up all the time, but it feels very standout and not necessarily in the most impactful way. Nevertheless, in terms of the charm and fun this ident has, it succeeds immensely. But now all the pigeons have gone, another reliable place in which you can find them would be on the pylons. This was another one of the staple classics from this era, and in fact was a sequence that, like Flats, was covered in one of the first Ident review episodes ever. This one just epitomises calm for me, certainly when I watch it now. The relaxed nature of the music, the warm glow of the sky, and the simple, uncomplicated structure of the pylons themselves all contribute to making this a joy to sit back and take in. The 4 logo is once again clearly visible within the structure itself, which for someone like me is always a plus. And whilst you could argue that more could have been done or more detail could have been included, I think the sequence works at its best just the way it is. And again, along with idents such as bowls or flats, there's a reason why Pylons is so fondly remembered by millions of viewers. Because through its simplicity, it carries across a strong impact. They've been doing pretty well on the whole with these so far, so let's see if Channel 4 keeps up that momentum when we look at everyone's favourite inconvenience, roadworks. This one just made me giggle. Similar to Flats, I feel the designers attempted to capture the impact that roadworks can have, but they go about it in a very humorous way. To see a driver skirt across the lanes without any real care and attention is so typical to see when roadworks are present, and indeed on the motorway in general. If you're a driver with road rage, this perhaps may make you triggered, but then you shouldn't be watching any telly whilst you're actually behind the wheel. Bar the bad driving, I actually find this ident a little empty. Once that moment has happened early on and we whiz by the 4 logo when it's all aligned, nothing much else really happens. I know these sequences aren't actually on screen for very long, and the continuity announcements probably take precedent, but it wouldn't have hurt to see these roadworks extend further down the road, or perhaps save the 4 logo alignment until the very end. I don't know, just after the first few seconds, there isn't really much to keep me too engaged. But perhaps our next ident may possess such qualities, as we move from the motorway back into the city to grab a taxi.
Good morning, Tiddly Peeps. Now it's time for a double from your colourful chums, the Hoobs, on 4.
More dodgy driving going on. In many ways, Taxi is quite similar to Roadworks in its layout and structure. However, why I prefer this one to Roadworks is just the landscape in which we're set in. Wherever this city is, its skyline looks gorgeous, and seeing the 4 become a part of that skyline towards the end is a brilliant choice. The POV shot from the road itself can be a little disorientating or just a little dull. Perhaps an aerial shot would have provided a stronger impact. But on the whole, if I had to choose between Taxi and Roadworks, I'd probably pick Taxi each time. It's certainly not the strongest or the most memorable of the 4 idents we've looked at so far today, but it does have its strengths. And now we're going a bit more out there with the next sequence, so brace yourself, and watch the skies for the UFO.
Johnny's caught in an illegal and deadly immigration scheme, the Dead Zone, at 1:05. First, $160,000 up for grabs for the partypoker.com late-night poker race on 4.
I love it when an ident can just have fun. For real, this is one of the most wacky, out there sequences you'll see from this Channel 4 set, but because they went all out, it works wonderfully. The setting, the evening sky, the bright lights of the 4-shaped UFO, similar to how Diner evoked an American film of the 80s, this one evokes a sci-fi B-movie from the 50s, in which the unsuspecting humans fall prey to the unknown beings of outer space. The 4 logo this time around looks absolutely gorgeous when we see it formed. The bright blue shade of the pieces really helps them stand out from the dark tones around them, and actually makes for quite an intriguing UFO if you ask me. One of my favourite moments is when the couple in the car stop arguing for a brief moment to look at the ship hovering outside before going straight back to arguing. It's not what I expected and ends up being really funny due to it breaking from an established cliché. Hands down one of the best idents from the set in my opinion. Sometimes wacky idents can fall flat on their face, usually if they don't push far enough with their concepts, but this isn't one of those instances, and it works wonders because of it. But as we move on, we're going to be making our way back down to Earth and take a trip down to the docks.
Jinx, spam, wedgies. Vic Reeves and the gang reminisce about the law of the playground at 9:30. But first up, Friday means Big B, and there's flashing images.
This may be the first dud of the set for me. Don't get me wrong, docks are really fascinating places in terms of their structure, and artistically you can do a lot with them. However, for me, this just comes off as feeling a little lackluster. We pan around the dockyard without too much going on, before we see the 4 logo. Sort of. This is one of those instances in which I find the 4 logo incredibly difficult to make out without having to pause and go frame by frame. Like, sure, I know it's there, but it isn't the most recognisable, I would argue. I never remember seeing docks air that much whenever I did tune into Channel 4, so I don't have that air of nostalgia towards it either. And whilst I can appreciate the sweeping span of a quiet dockyard, maybe considered somewhat peaceful and tranquil, for me, it's just not really working. Shame that I've decided on a dud in this set, but hopefully it'll be the first and also the last. Let's see if that holds true now, with our next ident of the day, aircraft.
So, 2 hours of top-notch US drama right now. Try and get your head round this. All's about to become clear in the event. Wait for it. On 4.
Something quite ominous about this one. I don't know what it is, but the expansive desert-type plain mixed with tons of abandoned aircraft just makes it feel a little spooky. Aeroplanes in themselves are fascinating pieces of machinery to look into, but just seeing how many of them can be left abandoned is also a little heartbreaking. We see the 4 logo this time is made up of said aircraft, and whilst it looks great, I wish it could have had a stronger focus. The camera lingers on it for a couple of seconds before whisking itself away, and had it panned out to reveal perhaps maybe an aerial shot of the 4 made up of planes, now that could have looked stunning. Overall, it's a nice sequence visually, and I dig the concept and the aesthetic, but I wish more was made of the 4 logo, and perhaps more things going on in general to build up the setting. But for now, forget about planes. How about we take the train instead to a place synonymous with fun and frivolity, Blackpool.
So, is it terrorism? Is it a conspiracy? One thing's for sure, you'll be hooked. The double bill of the event is at 9. Now though, table football and constant flirting. Oh, to have the life of a soap star, eh? Come dine with me on 4.
I can't help but smile at this one. Say what you want about Blackpool, I know it has its detractors, but by God, it's a marvellously visual city. This sequence also featured in that early Ident review episode, but I adore it conceptually. I love seeing the 4 logo made out of the different structures that fill up Blackpool, and particularly with how the Blackpool Tower is included, it just creates a stunning final image. Other than that, I love the quick trip down the promenade we're treated to, another feature that is linked inconsiderably with Blackpool as a holiday destination. If the Ident had been a bit longer, it would have been great to perhaps see the different attractions on offer, a shot of the Pleasure Beach theme park, some of the exhibitions, just a real grab bag of Blackpool. But even as it stands, this is a wonderful sequence to show off the place, and had they done more idents where the focus point had been a different location, that could have been an excellent running theme. But after you've lost your lunch on the Big Dipper, we head towards a less frivolous place, the scrapyard. Proper mixed bag for me, this one. I do admire the visual trickery that they've incorporated here. You see some stacks of cars shooting high into the sky, and whilst it may be a spectacle, there's no way that it could be done in real life. But the setting of the scrapyard is the most interesting aspect. They can be fascinating places, a child's playground of sorts if you have a good imagination. And whilst nothing much happens in the ident aside from the day-to-day workings of the place, I think what really helps make this succeed is how the music fits in. The various beats and sounds are timed with various segments of the ident, particularly when the Channel 4 logo comes into view. Not the clearest example, but still a standout one nonetheless. For me, I would have perhaps liked to have seen more people work their way through the scrapyard, injecting some of that imagination into an ident that really could help make it one of the most memorable of the set. A slight bit of missed potential, if you ask me, but hey, I'm no designer, so what do I know? Anyhow, moving swiftly onwards, we're going a bit more historical now, as we check out the ruins.
Now on for the rape trial continues in Hollyoaks.
Love a good set of ruins to roam around in. Like many of the settings that we've explored in the Ident set, the location is inherently fascinating. Ruins hold so much history and intrigue, and again, even with a good imagination, they can unlock so much detail. Seeing this camera pan around and explore this structure is both calming, yet really intriguing. It would have been ace to see even more of it within the sequence, but I'm happy with what we've got. The 4 logo this time around I think also looks great amongst the ruin site. The way it's been included within the works feels very natural and visually appealing to the eye. I would perhaps maybe have loved to see how these ruins change during the passage of time or something like that, but as it stands, this is a great example of simple, yet effective. But from calm scenery to some thrills and spills, it's time to go on the roller coaster.
Newcomers Air Traffic do their JD set at 12:30. First up, Sarah Cox comes into land for the Shockwaves album chart show on 4 Music.
A nice idea for sure, but I feel it's missing something. Don't get me wrong, I love roller coasters, and having an ident where the POV is from a rider's perspective, that's a great idea. And whilst it is great to see the various bits and pieces that lie around this coaster, there just feels like a big empty section within the sequence. Personally, I think the ident would be so much better if it not only had more things dotted around the track, but also was presented in an animated style. With some strong animation, bright vibrant colours and lots of things to look at, that would truly make for an eye-catching and engaging sequence. With what we have, it's not a bad ident per se, but it's one that after clocking the concept and that initial appeal, it leaves a lot to be desired. I barely noticed the Channel 4 logo on my first watch, which is always a disappointment in my view, when I can barely make out the station identifier. So, if you aren't too queasy from racing around, let's have a nice relaxing break on the sofa.
Crew at the pub having chocolate pills. Did you get that one?
Well, at the drinking, obviously the chocolate, that was that pizza.
Now for Player Presents Duke Special.
Someone needs to give his living room a tidy. Jokes aside, this one again takes a simple concept and injects that little bit of wackiness to give it some Channel 4 flair. We see some guy falling asleep on his sofa, blissfully unaware that several 4 pieces are moving around him, forming the levitating logo right above his head. It's nice to see that this setting looks lived in. We can see pizza boxes on the floor, and on the logo itself, several items of kitchen and dining ware, as well as a ton of empty cans and washing up. Presumably this guy doesn't get round to doing the house cleaning all that much. A pseudo-public service announcement. Make sure you tidy after yourselves. I don't have a great deal more to say about this one. It's a cute concept and the levitating pieces are interesting to stop and look at what lies on top of them, but aside from that, that's your sequence. It would have been nice to see more everyday household objects move around, even if they didn't form the logo at the end, but it's a perfectly harmless sequence nonetheless. But now we shall move to our final ident selection of the day. It's one I'm sure you all might be slightly familiar with, so let's jet off to Tokyo. Absolutely stunning. This is an incredible ident in my opinion, and certainly one of the most iconic Channel 4 has ever produced in its near 40-year history. We get a great look at the streets of Tokyo, dotted with bright, vibrant neon signs, interesting little side shops, and all kinds of people flocking around. The main highlight, of course, is the formation of the Channel 4 logo itself, which is made up of several of these bright signs. The neon fixtures are often used when a channel wishes to display Tokyo. I mean, just look at how the BBC used them to cover this year's Olympic Games. But they're such a key element of the city, especially at night, and seeing that familiar 4 shape get created from these bits of iconography is truly beautiful. Honestly, I could let this sequence just roll on and on for ages, just to sit back and take in these marvellous sights from one of Japan's most prolific cities, and a wonderful way to close out our look on this iconic set of idents. Overall, Channel 4 really went for variety when it adapted this rebrand in 2004. Whereas several channels were experimenting with a less is more motif, Channel 4 also did this to some extent, but still managing to inject their own special quality to many of the sequences that we've seen today. Many do have simple concepts or settings, and there are some in which not a lot happens at all. But for the most part, so many of these idents have become iconic amongst viewers. Whether it's the bright lights of Diner or Tokyo, to the grungy nature of flats or the soothing nature of pylons, there was a different kind of element or flavour that appealed to every kind of audience member. Several of these sequences would remain on the channel for over a decade, with the set as a whole finally being retired in 2015. And when your ident set has enough staying power to last for over 10 years, I think that speaks volumes about the quality and impact that they were able to have on millions upon millions of UK viewers. So here's to this set, and here's to Channel 4 as it fast approaches its 40th anniversary. And so that brings us to the end of another episode of the Ident Review. If you enjoyed this look at this iconic era of Channel 4, then please leave a like, comment your thoughts down below, and subscribe to the channel for lots more ident related content. I've been Adam Martyn from AMTV, thank you for joining me, and I'll see you next time. Well, that does bring us to the end of another day here on AMTV. We do hope you enjoyed the programme, and a special thank you to our patrons for helping to support the show, and to everyone who's tuned in. Until the next broadcast, we wish you a good night.